Hey everyone, it's Bells. Welcome back to my channel. So today is our July Tarot TBR. You clicked on the video, you know why you're here. It's gonna be a good time. I felt like I was really active about picking books. I'm really in the mood to read for this next month. Unfortunately for June, I had a really ambitious TBR and I started with A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara and absolutely hated it in every way. I would really like to just put it out there, like, not to read it. I honestly think it's kind of unethical in how it presents mental illness and disabilities. It's basically just emotional torture porn for 900 pages, and I don't want any of you to have to go through that. That kind of ruined all my reading plans for June, unfortunately. So I've been really active about what I picked for this one. I also decided for this video, I wanted to include my lovely Oracle deck as like a little way to switch things up. So the last card in the spread is going to be from my Goddess Power Oracle deck. Now for my Fairy Tale Tarot deck. You guys are gonna learn about a really cool Chinese goddess. She's rad. If you guys are enjoying this content, don't forget to like and subscribe, click all the buttons, you know the rules. Let's bring on the books. So I wanted to start off by showing you guys my Goddess Power Oracle deck. This was designed by Colette Baron Reed and illustrated by Jenna Della Grottaglia, and you're gonna see the card at the end of this spread, but this deck is one of the most beautiful decks. I'm absolutely obsessed with it, which is why I wanted to show it to all of you. Of course, it would not be my tarot video without Yoshi Yoshitani's Tarot of the Divine Fairy Tale Tarot deck. So the rules of the game, you can find all of the prompts and everything in the Google Doc that is linked in the description down below if you want to play along. One card equals one book. Some of the cards have like special prompts, mostly the major arcana, but otherwise, one card equals one book. Just pull as many cards as you want to read. Of course, we're going to be adding the Goddess card at the very end as an extra book, and I'm really excited about it. The first card that I pulled was the Star. The story represented here is Sister Alyanushka and Brother Ivanushka. I'm not going to call them that. I'm going to call them Ali and Ivan, just to make things simple. So this is a Russian fairy tale, and Ali and Ivan are siblings. Their parents died. So because their parents died, Ali had to take her little brother Ivan to work with her. And to get there, she has to cross like a really, really long field. As they walk, they come across different hooves, like animal hooves that are filled with water. And Ivan asks to drink from them, but she says no, because if he drinks from any of the hooves, he'll turn into that animal. And the third time, he does wind up drinking from a goat's hoof and turns into a little white goat. Ali just sits and cries because she's lost her brother. And while she's crying, a merchant passes by and asks her why. She tells him what happened, and he said that he would be happy to marry her and take the little goat to live with him. She says yes, and they were happy. And like so many of these fairy tales, I feel, start with some like random guy going up to a random sad girl and being like, hey, want to get married? And she's like, I mean, everything sucks in my life, so it couldn't get any worse. But they were happy. One day, the merchant left for work, had to go off on a little trip, and a witch shows up and basically lures Ali away from the house to the river, where the witch ties a rock around her neck and then throws her body into the river, stealing her likeness. Nobody knew. The merchant didn't know when he came back. Only the little goat, only little Ivan knew what had happened, and he sat next to the riverbank all day and night, didn't eat or drink, just called out for his sister to return to him. The witch discovered that he was doing this and convinces the merchant to let her kill the goat. Poor little Ivan finds out, convinces the merchant to let him go back to the river one final time, and he calls out to Ali again, telling her that he's going to die and like, please come back to him. She was finally able to answer, and a servant who had followed the goat heard her, like ran back to the merchant, was like, dude, your wife's in the river. The merchant like gathers a bunch of servants together and they pull out a net and like dredge the river to pull up Ali's body, and she is resurrected. And Ivan was so excited that his sister was back, he did 3 somersaults, and apparently that was the way to break the curse because he turned back into a lovely little boy. And the happily ever after isn't over. Remember, this is an old fairy tale, so it's gotta have a little darkness to it. The witch was tied to a horse's tail, and the horse was turned loose in an open field, and that was how she died, which is pretty gnarly. The card, the Star comes right after the Tower. So it signifies like a hopeful reprieve from that time of destruction and turmoil. It's about hope and faith and shows that you are entering a really peaceful and loving phase of your life. Very exciting. So my prompt that I have for the Star card is a lighthearted or hopeful book. And so I picked The Lunar Cats by Lynn Truss. This is a comedic horror about a retired librarian who has to deal with evil talking cats. It's gonna be so fucking weird. I'm so ready. That sounds so chaotic. I love cats. I love librarians. So that is the book that I picked for the star card. The next card that I pulled was the Five of Swords. The story represented here is Osiris, Set, and Isis. In ancient Egypt, the god Osiris shows up to rule, very well-loved, very good king, along with his queen Isis. His brother, Set, was jealous, wanted to be pharaoh instead, plotted to kill him by measuring his body. So like while Osiris was sleeping, Set came in, measured his body, and had a carpenter make a really beautiful golden box fit to his measurements. And then threw a huge party, invited Osiris, and was like, hey, anyone who can fit into this box can have it. And convinces Osiris to like go into the box, where he closes it, locks it, and throws it into the river, where Osiris drowns. When Isis hears that her husband was murdered, she searches the Nile for like days and days until she finds Osiris and hides his body in the reeds so that Set can't find him while she prepares like the burial rites. Unfortunately, Set discovered the body and cut Osiris into 14 pieces and threw them all over Egypt so that he could never ascend to the afterlife. But when Isis discovered this, she turned herself into a bird and flew all over Egypt, collecting all of the pieces, and with the help of her sisters, sewed them all together. She uses magic to bring him back from the dead, but he's basically like, look, I died. I can't be in the world of the living. I have to go become king of the afterlife. But don't worry, babe. You're pregnant, and your son Horus is going to defeat Set and become the protector of Egypt. When Horus was born, she managed to hide him from Set until he was of age to fight, and during the fight with Set, Horus's left eye was poked out but came to life to help him, and he eventually emerged victorious, was proclaimed Osiris's legitimate heir, and Set was banished forever. The card, the Five of Swords, comes up when you've had like a disagreement or a falling out with someone and you're walking away with a feeling of loss. So the advice here is to like pick your battles. It might not be worth it to win the argument this time. My prompt for 5 cards is a book over 500 pages and something informative or challenging for the swords. This doesn't come up in Storygraph as being like challenging, but I'm gonna pick Anne Rice's The Witching Hour for this because it should come up as challenging. This is like 1,000 pages of pretty dense history. So The Witching Hour is the first in Anne Rice's Southern Gothic trilogy about the lives of the Mayfair witches, their demonic helper Lestat, and Rowan, who is a renowned surgeon who was adopted away from the family and must return to New Orleans to like uncover the truth, save her family line. Kind of unclear what she's actually doing, but it's about witches. I was reading this in May and got just over halfway through and then took a break for Pride Month. So I'm going to be going back to this to finish it. I was already going to be reading it anyways, so it like kind of works. But it is challenging because we're really going through like centuries of history of this Mayfair family, of this witch's line, of Lestat and his influence. And there's so many characters to keep track of and like a lot of important information. So I would call this challenging, even if Storygraph wouldn't. And that is the book that I picked for the Five of Swords. The next card I pulled was the Knight of Wands, and this is Tatterhood, who is awesome. I love Tatterhood. This is a Norwegian fairy tale that starts with a king and queen who were unable to have any children, and a beggar woman eventually happens by claiming to be a witch, and after the queen supplies her with a bunch of alcohol, tells the queen how to conceive by washing herself with 2 buckets of water, dumping it below her bed, and eating one of the flowers that grows after this. So 2 flowers will appear, one beautiful and one ugly, but the queen is only to eat the pretty flower. But the queen decides to eat both. She ends up having twins. The younger one is like the most beautiful girl ever to be seen in the world, and the older one is like a little unique and like ugly by fairy tale standards. She is named Tatterhood because she always wears an old hood on her head and rides around on a goat with a wooden spoon. One day, many years in the future, some trolls and witches are like having a party outside of the palace and everyone's freaked out about it. So Tatterhood is like, don't worry guys, I got this. And she goes out there with her wooden spoon and beats them all up until they go away. Her younger sister though like peeks her head out while Tatterhood is doing this. One of the witches turns her head into a calf. Tatterhood's like, nuh-uh, you can't touch my sister. Takes the girl on a long sea voyage, just the 2 of them, to to discover the head like sitting on a witch's windowsill, like a hot pie in a cartoon. Tatterhood jumps her goat through the window, steals the head, beats back all the witches that are trying to fight her, swaps out her sister's head for the new one, and they just like travel around the sea together. And I wish this was the end of the story, but it's not. They eventually come to a faraway kingdom where a king and his only son live. The beautiful sister marries the king. Tatterhood marries the son, who's upset because she's like ugly or whatever, even though she's fucking cool. And while the two are like walking away from their wedding, Tatterhood, who is still on her goat and still holding the spoon, tells the prince to ask her about her goat. And he's like, okay, fine. What's with the goat? And she says, I don't know what you're talking about. This is a beautiful horse, and it becomes a beautiful horse. They do the same with the wooden spoon, which becomes an expensive silver fan. Her ragged hood becomes a crown, and Tatterhood herself becomes 10 times more beautiful than her sister. They go off to the palace to drink, live happily ever after, whatever. Personally, Tatterhood deserves better. Fuck the spoiled prince. Her and her sister should have gone off and had adventures, but that's fine. The card, the Knight of Wands. This is about the pursuit of a new idea. It's pushing you to make the calculated risk, trust your instincts, go for the new thing. The prompt that I have for Knight cards is a book published in the last 5 years, and for Wands, it is something adventurous or inspiring. And so what I picked is The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin. This is the second book in the Broken Earth trilogy, where the magic users are called Origines and use like a science fiction version of Earth magic. In the first book, our main character Assoon is looking for her kidnapped daughter, and in the second book, it looks like that search is going to continue. I personally found the first book to be like really heavy on exposition and world building, but light on the actual plot. So I'm really excited for the continuation here because I liked the writing of this book a lot. I'm excited for the story to start, you know what I mean? And that is what I picked for the Knight of Wands. So the next card I pulled was the Knight of Swords. The figure represented here is Hong Tuah, who is a legendary Malaysian warrior who was the Sultan's favorite and the most powerful admiral of the Sultan at that time. The other commanders were jealous of him and accused him of adultery with one of Sultan's like court ladies, wives, something along those lines, and the Sultan is so mad, he orders the Bendahara, which are basically like administrators, to execute Hong Tuah without actually doing any due diligence on it. They're like, no, and hide him away instead. So everyone thinks Hong Tuah is dead, including his best friends, and one of his friends, Hong Jabat, was so upset that he started going crazy, like having a killing spree crazy. The Sultan realizes his mistake because Hong Tuah is the only one who would be able to stop Hong Jabat. Long story short, Hong Tuah ends up coming back from the dead to execute Hong Jabat on the Sultan's order. He's considered the hero of the story, but the story was reanalyzed by a socialist author in the 70s from a more like democratic perspective, and he actually theorizes that Hong Jabat is supposed to be the hero of the story because he is like the rebel and revolutionary who was the only one willing to stand up to this authoritarian leader, which I thought was really interesting. If you want to read more about that, I have a link down below. The card, the Knight of Swords, shows you are motivated, ambitious, ready to dive right into a project, and it's just like reminding you to stay assertive and not to wait for something to happen. So the prompts that I have for Knight cards, again, a recent book. For swords, something informative or challenging, and so I picked what I think is the perfect book for our fairy tale TBR, and that is called Disfigured on Fairy Tales, Disability, and Making Space by Amanda LeDuc. This is a nonfiction written about the impact that fairy tales have on people with disabilities and how they create environments where we come to expect those disabilities to be fixed in order for the hero to have a happily ever after. And the book covers fairy tales from like the Brothers Grimm all the way to Disney. I have only heard good things about this book. Like, I haven't read it yet, but I'd like to be able to just recommend this pretty openly to everybody, so I'm very excited to read this one. And that's what I picked for the Knight of Swords. The next card I pulled is the Queen of Cups. The figure represented here is Yamoja, who we've seen before. She is the Queen of the Sea, the mother of all living things, and the river or sea Orisha, or deity of the Yoruba people. She was originally a river Orisha, but when her people were forced onto slave ships, she decided she couldn't abandon them and went with them, and eventually became known as the goddess of the sea instead. She is spectacularly beautiful, full of generosity, and someone who is very quick to anger if she feels like her waters or children are being disrespected. She's considered to be the mother of all living things, and one of her creation stories suggests that she was pregnant pregnant, and when her waters broke, it created all the streams and rivers on Earth. And from her womb, the first humans were born, who she gifted with a shell that contained her voice, so she would always be heard, which reminded me of like holding a conch shell to your ear and like hearing the sound of the ocean. Like, that's Yamoja speaking. The card, the Queen of Cups, is like Yamoja, nurturing, compassionate, sensitive. When you see her, you are embodying that nurturing energy. You're supporting others without taking on their emotional baggage. So you're like a really good support system without it actually affecting you. The prompt that I have for Queen cards is a female author. For Cups, something emotional or sad. And so I picked Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. It's a month of continuing series. Royal Assassin is the second book in the Farseer trilogy, which follows Fitz on his journey of becoming an assassin. I absolutely loved the first book. I've been like craving fantasy right now. I just want to like go back into this world, and I'm so excited to keep reading about it because I love Fitz, I love the Fool, I love the world. It's gonna be a good time. So that is the book that I picked for the Queen of Cups. And the last tarot card that I pulled for this spread is the Moon with Princess Kaguya. So this story we actually talked about last month. Princess Kaguya is the beautiful moon princess who was found in a stalk of bamboo, fell in love with the emperor, and eventually returned back to the moon, leaving the emperor and her adoptive parents eternally heartbroken. It's a very sad story. I was looking into some interpretations. One of them basically suggests that Kaguya was an alien, and it's one of like the original science fiction stories, and I think that's absolutely hilarious. Now, the card the Moon represents fear and illusions, or it could indicate like a time of uncertainty. When this comes up in a spread, it's really warning you to like trust your intuition because nothing is what it seems to be, and just really focus on setting intentions and releasing old or painful memories or thoughts. The prompt that I have for Moon cards is a book that you're scared to read, and so for this one I picked Being Lolita by Alison Wood. This is a memoir about 17-year-old Allison who is groomed into having a relationship with her much older teacher, with the backdrop of the book Lolita as like a representation of their romance, which is horrible, and I think you can probably figure out why I'm scared to read it. We'll just move on from that one. That is what I picked for the Moon card. The Moon card is the last tarot card that I pulled, but as I promised, I also pulled a goddess card from my beautiful Goddess Power Oracle deck, and the lovely goddess that came up for me was Lazy. This card is so freaking pretty. I'm so obsessed with this deck. I think it's so gorgeous. So Lazy, or Dianmu, is the Chinese goddess of lightning. Her origin story starts with her husband, Lei Gong, who is the god of thunder. And the Jade Emperor, who is the first god, told Lei Gong to take revenge on evil human beings by sending down thunderbolts to punish them. Lei Gong did that, but he was fucking terrible at it. His storms were too dark, so he couldn't see anything and just kept killing the wrong people or wouldn't kill anyone at all. Lazy was this poor mortal woman who lived in a small village caring for her ailing mother. One day was like throwing away some rice husks because her mom couldn't eat them anymore. And Lei Gong saw her, thought she was wasting food, and was like, that's a killable offense, and sent a thunderbolt to kill her. And ironically, of course, this one actually hits her and kills her. And the Jade Emperor is like, what the fuck, Lei Gong? Stop doing that. And resurrects Lazy as a goddess and told Lei Gong to marry her to like right his wrongs. And she became the lightning deity, assisting Lei Gong as they traveled around the world. The Goddess Power deck is focused on like rediscovering your feminine energy and focusing on your intuition, and is full of goddesses from cultures all over the world to like support you, which is why I thought it would fit in really well with the fairy tale theme of these tarot TBRs. So Lazy signifies revelation. Basically, when she comes up, is bringing epiphanies into your life as a gift for your work on dismantling your old self. So obviously I don't have specific prompts for these yet, but I am toying with the idea of creating an Oracle TBR spread like specific to this deck. So let me know if that is something you would be curious about. For Lazy as the goddess of revelations, I wanted to pick something where like information was really important. I decided to look into like portal fantasies because it's like information about something else that changes your life forever. So the book that I picked is one that's been on my TBR pretty much since I started creating a digital TBR, and that is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This is about grad student Zachary, who discovers a mysterious book that leads him into a fantasy world. of lost cities and stories. Basically learns of the people who intend to destroy it and works with Mirabelle, who is a pink-haired protector, which we love, and the shifty but very pretty Dorian to discover his purpose, save the world. You know how fantasies are. I love reading books about books that talk about stories. Always a good time. And we're not even done, guys. That was the last card that I pulled for this spread, but it is also the month of buddy reads. I am buddy reading 2 books with 2 lovely other booktubers. The first book I will be reading is Summer Suns by Lee Mandello. I'm gonna be buddy reading this with Jem. Go check out her channel, she's hilarious. And this is a gothic horror about 2 best friends, one of which apparently commits suicide and the other is looking for the truth, basically. It's like a horror mystery dark academia vibe, and I've been really excited about this book for a while. The other book I am buddy reading is finally, oh my god, The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I will be reading this with the lovely Fran, and this is the first of Brandon Sanderson's 10-book fantasy series, of which 4 are currently released, about an enslaved soldier, an army commander who discovers the ancient text called The Way of Kings, fears he's going crazy, and a young woman training as a scholar with some untoward motives. And I could not be more excited to read more of his books. That marks the end of this lovely video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the stories. As always, let me know how you feel about them. I love to hear what you're reading. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying it. Go and check out this video if you'd like to watch something else from me, and I will see you all next time.